Hey guys, tonight we're traveling far, far back, deeper than your usual history class nightmare, to the edge of the Nile, under a sky so bright it feels like the ancient world forgot to dim its HDR settings. You're lying there, next to a small clay lamp flickering against papyrus walls, and you realize, we're about to uncover whispers. Real whispers. The kind that were never meant to survive thousands of years, yet somehow did, trapped inside fragile rolls of papyrus, carrying secrets that still feel oddly personal. And trust me, if you had to spend just one night here, without AC, Netflix, or iced coffee, you wouldn't last 5 minutes. Honestly, I'm sweating just imagining it for you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing which corner of the world we're sharing this night with. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a slow step into the ancient world without realizing it, as if time itself melts around you. The mud brick walls of Memphis, the capital of ancient Egypt, are still warm from the day's sun, and the night outside hums with insects, like someone carefully designed a soundtrack just to slow you down. On a low wooden table before you, there are rolls of papyrus resting silently, their edges frayed like old movie tickets forgotten in a pocket. And in this very moment, you're not just reading history, you're listening to it whisper. People always assumed papyrus was only used for important things, dynasties, wars, temple decrees, but that's only half the story. When archaeologists first unrolled papyrus buried beneath desert sands, they expected royal edicts and sacred hymns. Instead, they stumbled upon something unexpected: fragments of private conversations. A clumsy reminder from a husband to his wife, a half-joking scolding, even little notes of tenderness, the ancient equivalent of a "thinking about you" text message, carefully inked onto scrolls meant to last forever. No smartphones, no DMs, no "Scene 12:03 a.m." notifications, yet somehow, people still found a way to leave their whispers behind. You glance at the delicate strokes of ink, so fine they're almost hair-thin, and you picture the hand that wrote them, long fingers stained with black soot, trembling under the dim flicker of an oil lamp. One historian once joked that if you stitched all these whispers together, you'd have something like a giant cross-millennia group chat. You can almost read the threads: a wife gently complaining about dinner, a servant whispering about escaping, a high-ranking official scribbling notes about secret lover number 2. Some passages even confuse modern scholars. Were they poems, diary entries, or coded spy messages written in syrupy tones to mislead anyone reading them? Historians still debate it to this day. You close your eyes for a moment and let your imagination carry you. A dark room, the Nile lapping gently outside, a single bed stuffed with reeds, and someone leaning close, whispering into another's ear. Their breath mingles with the faint scent of fresh papyrus. You can almost hear their voices now, so soft, so close, like catching an old radio frequency from thousands of years ago. Then you notice something strange. The ink on one passage is uneven, blurred, almost like it was smudged by tears. Experts believe the writer was hunched over the scroll, writing right on their pillow, eyes stinging from the smoke of the lamp. They probably never imagined anyone would read these lines again, let alone someone, thousands of years later, lying in a modern bed, listening to their words whispered back. You smile faintly, realizing you've stepped into this secret conversation across time. And as the night breeze brushes the side of your neck, you understand something important. To truly know history, sometimes you have to listen to what no one ever meant to tell you. The night along the Nile feels endless. You walk slowly, bare feet brushing against cool grains of sand, while the air carries that mix of damp river water and warm earth that somehow smells exactly like time itself. The breeze is soft but restless, tugging at your clothes, and somewhere nearby, a reed flute sighs a melody you can't quite place, half lullaby, half prayer. For a moment, you forget the present completely. You're here, thousands of years ago, in the heart of ancient Egypt, and tonight, the river itself is keeping secrets. The Nile glimmers under moonlight, wide and unbroken, like a strip of silver silk unraveling into the darkness. Fishermen are pulling in their small reed boats, tying them to crooked wooden stakes, their quiet voices mingling with the soft slap of water. Further down the bank, you see a figure crouched low, holding something tightly under their arm, a roll of papyrus, sealed with a strip of wax. You move closer, careful not to disturb the stillness, and realize you're watching someone smuggle words into the night. This is where it all begins, the whispers, the pillow talk, the little fragments of private lives immortalized on papyrus. Back then, secrecy was an art form. Without phones, without passwords, without private browsing mode, the only way to protect a secret was to hide it inside symbols, metaphors, or sometimes, inside your lover's ear. Yet oddly enough, people kept writing everything down anyway. Why? Because even 3,000 years ago, someone always wanted to remember. A group of scribes sits nearby on woven mats, their shadows flickering under clay lamps. You watch one dip his reed pen into a bowl of soot-black ink, shoulders hunched as he leans in close, carefully copying a short note. It's not a royal decree, not a temple hymn, just a single sentence meant for one person only. And yet here it is, recorded forever. You can almost hear his sigh as he sets the pen down, wiping sweat from his brow with ink-stained fingers. He has no idea that centuries later, someone will read these words aloud in a language he's never even heard of, to a stranger lying in bed somewhere far away, maybe in a city he couldn't imagine. But not all whispers were meant to be sweet. Some papyrus fragments unearthed near Thebes reveal tension. Heated arguments between spouses written like confessions, accusations of betrayal, stolen jewelry, or secret meetings in the gardens of wealthy estates. You almost laugh, realizing that drama hasn't changed much in thousands of years. The only difference is that today, it would all unfold in messy group chats and passive-aggressive Instagram captions. Back then, you etched it onto papyrus and prayed no one else would see. Spoiler alert, someone did. Us. And yet, some whispers are tender in ways that stop you cold. In one scroll fragment, a young wife writes, "The sound of your breath still lingers in the walls of this house." That sentence, fragile and trembling, crosses 3 millennia to sit beside you tonight. You can almost picture her, resting on a low cot stuffed with reeds, writing by lamplight as the river breeze sneaks through the shutters, trying to hold on to something she knows she might lose. You pause here, letting the hum of the river sink into your chest, and you realize something funny. Ancient Egyptians probably never thought of their private words as history. For them, these were throwaway moments, the kind of conversations you'd have half asleep, cheek pressed into a pillow. But somehow, those fleeting exchanges survived the heat, the floods, the sandstorms, and ended up in glass cases inside climate-controlled museums. Somewhere, behind red velvet ropes, a sleepy security guard walks past a fragment of papyrus, completely unaware he's guarding someone's 3,000-year-old love letter. And here's the strange part. The more you read, the more you notice patterns. Certain phrases repeat like secret codes, like everyone knew the script. May the gods carry my words to your ears. Meet me where the reeds bend. Sleep, but keep your heart awake. It's poetic, but also practical, subtle ways of slipping desire into sentences without alerting prying eyes. Historians still debate whether these were genuine expressions or socially accepted templates of intimacy. And honestly, that makes it even more fascinating, because it blurs the line between private feeling and public performance. You sit down at the edge of the river, knees drawn up, and run your fingers through the sand. The grains are warm on the surface but cool underneath, like time itself is layered here. The stars above are so bright they almost hum, and you wonder if someone, thousands of years ago, sat in this exact spot doing the same thing, listening to the water, writing down their secrets, hoping they'd vanish, and yet, somehow, they didn't. Far off, you hear the low call of a night bird, echoing across the riverbanks. And in that moment, it hits you. Maybe history isn't made of grand battles and monumental kings after all. Maybe it's built from these small, quiet moments. A husband's messy scrawl, a wife's longing sigh, a servant's whispered complaint scribbled in the dark. The pieces no one thought would last, but somehow they did. You lean back on your elbows, eyes half closed, the Nile's breeze brushing across your face. It feels as though the river is holding its breath, waiting for you to listen just a little closer. And you do. You hear it, not just the water, not just the reeds, but something else beneath it all. A murmur, a story, a thread tying you to someone who lived and loved and whispered on this very shore thousands of years ago. The night drapes itself around you like soft linen, the kind woven by hand in some tiny workshops centuries ago. You move away from the riverbank now, climbing narrow stone steps worn smooth by thousands of bare feet before yours. The sounds of the Nile grow distant behind you, just a soft hiss in the darkness, replaced by something quieter, heavier. You've entered the private world of an ancient household, where shadows hide in the folds of curtains and secrets breathe between pillows. The door creaks open to a small room lit by a single clay lamp. Its weak flame dances lazily, throwing restless shapes across the plaster walls. There's a bed in the corner, nothing like yours, though, just a low wooden frame, bound together with rope, topped by a mat of reeds stuffed into faded linen. And there, almost hidden beneath a folded sheet, lies a roll of papyrus, tied loosely with twine. Someone wanted it close, but not too obvious. You kneel, careful not to disturb the dust, and gently untie the knot. The fibers of the papyrus feel fragile under your fingertips, rough and soft all at once, like they've absorbed centuries of whispers. The ink is faded but still legible, and as your eyes adjust, the words begin to take shape. It's not a temple decree, not a trade record, not even an inventory of grain like so many scrolls you've seen before. No, this is different. When the moon tilts toward your window, know that I am awake. The sentence is short, clumsy, intimate, something written not for the world, but for one set of ears only. And you realize something almost funny: you're intruding. Thousands of years later, you've stumbled into someone else's midnight conversation, the kind whispered in half-dreams when you think no one's listening. But here you are, listening anyway. You lie back on the reed mat, close your eyes, and let the room guide you. You can almost feel the heat trapped inside these walls, hear the muffled laughter drifting from the courtyard below, smell the faint traces of honeyed wine clinging to the clay cups on the table. Someone once lived here, loved here, worried here. And maybe, just maybe, they lay exactly where you are now, whispering into the quiet, trusting their secrets to a pillow, not realizing those very secrets would end up written in ink. Not all these whispers were about love, though. Some papyrus fragments hold conversations that historians still can't fully explain. In one, a servant records overheard arguments between her mistress and a visitor who came after dark, hints of an affair, maybe, or something political, coded in soft tones so the house wouldn't wake. Scholars argue endlessly over this passage. Was it pillow talk between forbidden lovers? Or was it an encrypted exchange of information, disguised as affection? No one agrees. And honestly, that's what makes it irresistible, the uncertainty. You find another scroll tucked beneath the bed frame, its edges curling like dried leaves. This one begins with a simple plea. Do not speak aloud what was written in this room. That's it. No explanation. No context. Just a warning, which, let's be honest, makes you want to read it even more. And as your eyes scan the faded lines, you realize how little separates their world from yours. People have always whispered secrets into safe spaces, hoping walls and pillows would keep them contained. Today, we delete texts, clear chat histories, set up encrypted backups. Back then, you trusted Papyrus, and the faith that no one would unroll it centuries later under museum lights. Spoiler alert, we totally did. The lamp sputters for a moment, making the shadows jump. You glance toward the small window, where the night breathes through linen curtains, and you wonder if someone stood here once, waiting for an answer that never came. In a fragment recovered near Alexandria, there's a heartbreaking note scribbled hurriedly along the margins of a marriage contract. If you wake and I am gone, remember that I wanted to stay. It's raw, unpolished, and utterly human. And somewhere between the layers of papyrus and time, you can almost feel the writer's presence still lingering in the air, restless, unanchored, like a voice caught mid-sentence. You stretch out on the bed for a moment, letting your palm rest against the rough linen pillow. It's flatter than you expect, stuffed with reeds instead of feathers, but there's a weight to it, a history it remembers even if no one else does. That's the thing about these ancient bedrooms. The walls might keep their silence, but the pillows? They've always been terrible at keeping secrets. Because here's the twist historians rarely mention. Papyrus wasn't just for recording official decrees. Sometimes these scrolls doubled as personal memory banks, kept under pillows or inside carved wooden chests. Couples wrote short notes to each other, private jokes, soft reassurances, little sparks of longing, and stored them like hidden treasure where only one person would find them. Imagine sliding a handwritten message under someone's pillow today instead of texting, "Good night, Red Heart." And yet, the papyrus never forgot. The fibers clung to ink like skin to scars, carrying fragments of nights long past into our hands now. You think about that for a while, lying there in the half-dark, how someone tried to capture a fleeting feeling, scribbling it down in the quiet hours, never knowing that someday, strangers would read it aloud to fall asleep to. There's something beautiful about that, and maybe a little haunting, too. You open your eyes slowly, staring at the wavering lamplight above you. For a moment, it feels like you're suspended between two worlds, theirs and yours, ancient and modern, divided by time but connected by these tiny, unguarded confessions. And somewhere out there, on a dusty shelf in a quiet museum, the papyrus waits, still holding its breath, still keeping its secrets, until someone like you comes along to listen. The lamplight fades behind you as you step out of the small chamber, leaving the secret scrolls nestled where you found them, and you follow the narrow hallway toward the scribe's quarters. Outside, the night hums with the soft sounds of the city, distant footsteps, muted laughter, the faint clatter of pottery from a nearby kitchen. But here, inside these shadowed walls, another kind of silence reigns. It's the silence of concentration, the kind you could almost slice apart with a reed pen. You enter a long, low-ceilinged room lit by rows of tiny clay lamps. The smell of soot, resin, and faintly sweet papyrus pulp fills the air. Around you, a dozen men and women are hunched over wooden desks, their spines curved like drawn bows, faces lit by the soft glow of oil flames. These are the scribes, the silent guardians of voices long past. Without them, the whispers we've been following wouldn't exist. You watch one scribe, maybe 17 at most, dip his reed brush into a small pot of black ink. His movements are slow, deliberate, careful enough to make you hold your breath. The ink isn't just soot and water, it's mixed with gum arabic to bind it to the fibers, a technique so precise that fragments of their writing survive even now, 3,000 years later. You glance down at the scrap of papyrus under his hand and notice something odd. The text isn't an official temple record or a tax register. It's softer. The bed creaks when you breathe my name. The words curve across the page like a sigh. You glance up at the boy, expecting some sign of embarrassment, but he's expressionless, eyes fixed on the strokes. He probably doesn't even know what the message means. His task isn't to understand, only to preserve. That's the thing about scribes. They were both invisible and indispensable. They copied letters, decrees, contracts, and sometimes, the private exchanges people trusted them with. In a way, they were the ancient equivalent of cloud storage, except they remembered everything. You can't help but grin a little at the thought. Scroll-based intimacy backups, 3,000 years before encrypted messaging apps were even a dream. But here's the twist. Some scribes weren't just passive recorders. They knew. They noticed patterns, recognized recurring names, and sometimes, they added their own quiet commentary. One famous papyrus from Saqqara carries a faint scribbled note along its margin. He tells her the same words he wrote to the other one. You laugh softly under your breath. So yes, even in the ancient world, someone was subtweeting through papyrus margins. And historians today are still arguing whether these little annotations were deliberate acts of gossip or simply exhausted scribes entertaining themselves during long, sleepless nights. Either way, you start to see them less as faceless copyists and more as quiet conspirators, living in the spaces between the lines. You walk farther down the room, passing one scribe who's carefully sharpening a reed pen with a flint knife. Another is mixing fresh ink by crushing charred acacia pods into a mortar, the motion rhythmic, meditative, like the heartbeat of the whole room. And everywhere you hear the soft rasp of brushes on papyrus, a sound so delicate it's almost like breathing. Somewhere in the corner, a young woman reclines on her elbows, her scroll balanced across her knees. She's working on what looks like a legal document, a property transfer, maybe, but between two dry, formal paragraphs, there's a single line written in an entirely different hand. Meet me by the date palms when the river bends. It's so small, so faint you almost miss it. Was it a hidden message slipped into a contract, or did someone simply reuse the papyrus later for personal notes? Historians can't agree. But you can picture it clearly, the person receiving this scroll pretending to read a boring tax agreement in public while secretly decoding an invitation to a midnight meeting. In a way, it's ancient Egypt's version of delete after reading. Except, of course, it didn't get deleted. What's stranger is how much these scribes knew, and how much they chose to forget. Imagine copying a dozen private letters in a single night, each filled with longing or jealousy or betrayal, and then going home to your own bed, where your own secrets waited for you. Some fragments even suggest that scribes occasionally inserted themselves into these whispered stories. Whether intentionally or accidentally, we'll never know. One surviving scroll hints at this beautifully. The words are not mine, yet I write them with my hand, and somehow I dreamed them later. You stop there for a moment, letting that line settle in your chest. Because it's true, isn't it? When you carry other people's secrets long enough, they start to live in you, shaping the rhythm of your own nights. And there's something almost tragic about it. These scribes preserved love letters and secret arguments, pillow talk and promises, but they rarely left anything of themselves behind. No one recorded their whispers. You glance around the room now, at their hunched shoulders and tired hands, and realize you're surrounded by ghosts whose own voices have been swallowed by history. The lamp nearest you flickers, throwing shadows that stretch like long ink strokes across the wall. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the rustle of papyrus fill the silence. And in that stillness, you imagine you can hear them, the scribes, sighing softly across centuries, their hands aching, their minds full of stories they were never supposed to tell. Somewhere outside, the wind shifts, carrying the river's cool breath into the room. You open your eyes and feel it brush against your skin, as though the Nile itself is whispering through time. Listen closely, because even the quietest hands leave traces. The night deepens, and the scribe's room fades behind you as you step into another chamber, quieter, darker, warmer. Here, the air feels different. Thicker. You can smell the faint sweetness of perfumed oil, hear the soft rustle of linen, and sense that this room once held things no historian can ever fully reconstruct. You kneel on the cool stone floor, brushing away dust, and notice another set of papyrus rolls tucked into a carved wooden box. These ones are smaller, thinner, less formal. The edges are curled, the fibers brittle from being hidden too long. You untie one, and as the scroll unfurls, you know instantly that you've stepped into forbidden territory. I saw you by the river when the others slept. The first line catches your breath. No titles. No formal greetings. Just confession, unguarded and raw. Whoever wrote this wasn't thinking about kings, temples, or eternity. They were thinking about one person, the only person, and how to make sure their words reached them without anyone else knowing. You pause for a moment, holding the papyrus gently, like it might vanish if you breathe too hard. Because this isn't history, not really. It's a heartbeat on paper. You read further, and the story blooms in fragments. A wealthy merchant's wife. A young court scribe. Nights stolen beneath the palm shadows where the river bends. The scroll doesn't explain how they met, or why, but you can feel it anyway. Two people caught in a gravity they couldn't escape. You almost smile, realizing how little has changed over 3,000 years. The secret messages, the stolen glances, the excuses carefully rehearsed, they're not that different from accidentally liking someone's photo at 2 a.m. on Instagram today. But of course, it was far more dangerous back then. You trace your finger along the faded ink and remember, in ancient Egypt, adultery wasn't just scandalous. It could ruin entire families, end alliances, even cost lives. Yet here it is, preserved in soft whispers on fragile papyrus, proof that desire was stronger than fear. Not all forbidden love ended quietly, though. Another fragment, recovered from a house near Thebes, tells a different kind of story. I dream of you even when you stand beside him. That's all it says, scrawled hurriedly in the margin of a festival inventory list. Scholars still debate what it means. Was this a hidden declaration? A warning? A confession left deliberately where it might be found? Nobody knows. What we do know is that the same scroll contains, just a few lines later, a clipped note that feels colder. Do not write to me again. The walls have ears. You sit back for a moment, letting the words settle, and you realize something both beautiful and heartbreaking. So many of these secrets outlive the people who carry them. Lovers turned to dust. Pillows rotted away. Houses collapsed into sand. And yet, the papyrus remembered. Then, unexpectedly, you find humor in the midst of longing. A scribe's personal notes discovered near Memphis contain what might be the earliest known breakup joke. May the gods bless your next husband, whoever he is, for needing far more patience than I. You actually laugh out loud, startling yourself in the quiet room. You picture the scribe smirking to himself, imagining his ex reading it years later, equal parts annoyed and impressed. Ancient sarcasm, preserved perfectly, like a tiny, petty time capsule. But the most haunting fragment you uncover tonight is from a scroll scholars simply call the Palm Grove Letter. If the gods take me first, keep my name under your pillow so I may still hear you breathe. It's a single line, faint as though the reed pen was nearly dry, and yet it lands with a weight that lingers in your chest. You imagine someone writing this under the glow of an oil lamp, their hand shaking slightly, knowing that time was running short. And you wonder, did the letter ever reach its intended reader? Did they keep it under their pillow as promised? Or did it remain hidden, waiting for us to stumble across it centuries later, piecing together their story like dreamers walking backward through time? The deeper you dive, the clearer it becomes. Papyrus wasn't just a tool for bureaucracy or history. It was a vault for intimacy. Secrets folded into scrolls, tucked into boxes, hidden under mattresses, stored in jars. Some were meant to be read once and burned, others, perhaps, were treasured in secret. But none of them ever really disappeared. Historians argue endlessly over what we should do with these fragments. Are we trespassing by reading them? Are we breaking some ancient trust by whispering their words into the present? There's no consensus. Some scholars insist they're cultural artifacts, windows into private life we can't afford to ignore. Others believe they're too personal, too raw, meant to be buried forever. And somewhere, between those debates, you sit quietly with the papyrus in your hands, feeling like you've just overheard something you were never supposed to know. The oil lamp sputters, sending shadows stretching across the walls, and you close the scroll gently, tying the twine back in place. You can almost feel the hush of the room pressing in, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. Because here's the truth: history doesn't always live in monuments or temples or statues. Sometimes it curls up under a pillow, waiting patiently for someone, you, to lean in close and listen. The room grows quieter as you set aside the love letters, and now your attention drifts toward the ink itself, those delicate, curling lines that have survived thousands of years against every possible chance. You lean closer to a half-faded scroll under lamplight, and for a moment, it feels less like you're reading history and more like you're touching it. Every stroke, every tiny smear, every uneven pause in the writing holds a story of its own. You pick up a small fragment resting on the table. The papyrus fibers feel dry and soft, fragile as old skin, yet the ink etched into them is still bold in places, clinging stubbornly to time. Black, mostly, though not the deep, solid black you'd expect from modern pens. Up close, it's smoky, almost gray, as if the soot used to make it came straight from an ancient fire. And in a way it did. Ancient Egyptian ink wasn't just a color, it was a recipe. charred acacia pods ground into fine soot, gum arabic from acacia sap to bind the particles, water carefully mixed to achieve a consistency just right for a reed pen's split tip, and sometimes a little twist, traces of copper or ochre mixed in to deepen the tone or make it shine faintly under lamplight. You imagine someone crouched in a small corner, grinding charred wood in a tiny stone mortar, murmuring under their breath about how much ink they need to copy 20 scrolls before dawn. No pre-made bottles. No ballpoint convenience. Every drop was labor. And yet, the way the ink behaves tells its own secrets. You notice one scroll where the writing begins dark and crisp, then fades halfway through, the strokes thinner, lighter, shakier. Maybe the scribe's lamp burned too low. Maybe their wrist cramped after hours of copying tiny lines. Or maybe, and this thought makes you pause, maybe their heart was racing. Because right there, in the center of the papyrus, is an abrupt blot, like a sudden burst of emotion pressed too hard into the fibers. You run your finger just above the surface, careful not to touch, and you realize the ink holds clues far beyond words. Smudges where someone brushed a hand too quickly across wet lines. Splashes where a reed pen cracked under pressure. Even fingerprints, faint, invisible to the naked eye but still there, trapped inside the chemical layers, belonging to someone who lived 3,000 years ago. Science can trace them now, lifting echoes of DNA from the ink itself. The papyrus whispers back, in ways no one ever imagined. And then there are the colors. Black for words, yes, but red for emphasis, the ancient equivalent of bold text, or maybe caps lock. Red ink appears on warnings, headings, or the occasional scandalous line meant to grab your attention. One fragment you examine carries a single red-inked sentence among an otherwise black-inked page. Speak softly here. The walls are not loyal. It looks almost theatrical, like a stage direction hidden in plain sight. Historians debate endlessly whether the red ink marked secrecy or simply importance, but you can't help imagining a scribe pausing, dipping their brush carefully, and whispering the line to themselves before writing it, maybe even smiling at the drama of it all. Not all marks on the papyrus are intentional, though. Some are accidents frozen forever in time. On one scrap, a tiny circular stain blooms like a shadowy flower. Researchers believe it's a teardrop. Was the writer crying, exhausted after copying page after page? Or was this a love letter written by someone terrified, hiding under lamplight while the house slept, tears falling onto words they could never speak aloud? You close your eyes for a second, imagining them there, hunched over, ink-stained fingertips trembling, secrets bleeding into fibers. And then there are scrolls where the handwriting changes entirely, mid-sentence, mid-thought, like two voices woven into one page. Was the first scribe interrupted? Did someone else pick up where they left off? Or, and this makes you shiver, was someone correcting, rewriting, censoring? In one notorious scroll found near Aswan, entire sections are crossed out in thick black lines, hiding whatever was beneath them. Scholars have spent decades trying to reconstruct the erased text with imaging technology, but it's still a mystery. Was it political? Romantic? Dangerous? No one knows. But the papyrus remembers. It just won't give up its secrets easily. You can almost hear the quiet frustration of modern researchers bent over microscopes, muttering softly, "Come on, just one more layer." And yet you also hear the echoes of ancient scribes sighing in their own candlelit rooms, blotting mistakes they hoped no one would ever see. Two sets of hands separated by 3,000 years, both hunched over the same faded ink. And there's something strangely intimate about that connection. You sit back for a moment, resting your head against the cool wall, and it hits you. These aren't just words preserved on papyrus. These are fingerprints. These are breath marks. These are fragments of nights when someone sat awake, long after everyone else had fallen asleep, whispering their thoughts into reed pens because they couldn't carry them any longer. Somewhere nearby, a papyrus crackles softly as you shift your weight, the dry fibers sighing like wind through reeds. You realize how delicate it all is, the ink, the scrolls, the voices trapped inside them. They weren't meant to survive this long. They weren't meant for you. And yet here they are, alive under lamplight, whispering across millennia. You close your eyes, inhaling the faint sweetness of old resin and soot, and for a moment, you imagine the ink itself speaking, "I remember more than anyone ever asked me to." The air grows warmer as you leave the quiet chambers behind and follow the soft hum of voices down a narrow corridor. The smell hits you first: roasted duck glazed in honey, warm bread baked in clay ovens, and crushed coriander lingering in the air. You're stepping into the heart of an ancient Egyptian household, the dining hall. And here's the twist: the whispers we've been following? They didn't always stay in the bedroom. Sometimes they spilled onto dinner tables, folded into gossip, and traveled farther than anyone ever intended. You pause at the doorway for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the flicker of oil lamps reflecting off bronze plates and polished jars. Servants weave between long, low tables, balancing trays of figs and spiced wine. Linen curtains ripple gently in the evening breeze, carrying in the faint hum of cicadas outside. Somewhere, a lute plucks a slow, lazy tune, and over it, soft voices rise and fall like tides, secretive, excited, conspiratorial. You sit cross-legged on a woven mat near the edge of the room, careful to blend into the shadows. At one table, two women lean close, their cups of date wine untouched as they speak in low tones. He sent her another letter. They say it was tucked beneath her pillow. You glance up instinctively, heart skipping a little. There it is, pillow talk crossing walls and thresholds, carried on the soft edges of rumor. You can almost see it happening. A husband whispers to his wife under the cover of night, thinking the words will stay safe. But by morning, the servant folding linens in the corner hears something, tells the cook, who tells the merchant, who tells everyone. The papyrus remembers whispers, but so do people. Across the room, another conversation catches your ear. A tall man in deep indigo linen leans in close to his friend, speaking over the steady scrape of reed pens somewhere outside. The grain shipment was late again. But if you knew why. And just like that, you're pulled into a different kind of secrecy. Not about love, but power. So many of these papyrus fragments historians find sound casual at first glance, just lists of goods or household inventories. But if you read carefully, tucked between mentions of barley and honey jars, you find sudden clues. Who met whom, when, and for what reason. The dinner tables were less about food and more about strategy. Ancient pillow talk didn't just confess desire, sometimes it whispered politics. You lean back, closing your eyes briefly, letting the conversations blend into one soft murmur. In some ways, nothing has changed. Even now, entire reputations are shaped by things said over dinner tables, half-truths sliding between cups of wine. Back then, though, there were no newspapers, no radio, no Twitter feeds. Gossip was the news. If you wanted to know who was secretly meeting by the river, which official was lining his pockets with temple grain, or which noble's son had written a scandalous poem, you came here, to the dining hall, and you listened. Not all the whispers were malicious, though. Some were surprisingly tender, pass like secret notes hidden between bites. One papyrus fragment describes a scene from a feast, the guests drunk on sweet beer and music, where a young woman slips her hand under the table and presses a folded scrap into her lover's palm. The surviving line is just 4 words. "Meet me after moonrise." Simple. Urgent. Vulnerable. It survived because someone scribbled it onto the corner of a reused scroll, as if the papyrus itself wanted to keep the memory safe. But here's where it gets interesting. Archaeologists have discovered that certain phrases kept popping up again and again in these dining hall fragments, almost like coded language. "The stars are low tonight," meant a secret meeting. "The jars are sealed," signaled that a rumor was true but couldn't be spoken aloud. Entire social networks were built on whispered codes, passed mouth to ear like contraband, keeping secrets alive while pretending nothing had been said at all. And yet, sometimes, these secrets became dangerous. In one scroll recovered from a collapsed villa near Luxor, a short line reads, "The walls carried their voices." That's it. No context, no explanation, just an ominous reminder that even private rooms weren't always private. Historians still debate its meaning. Was it literal, a sign of thin walls and attentive servants? Or metaphorical, warning that even words buried under pillows eventually find their way into the open? Whatever the truth, you feel a chill crawl down your spine as you reread it. Because maybe that's the real lesson buried in these fragments. Whispers are never as safe as they seem. They ripple outward, from bed to table, from house to street, from scroll to scroll, until someone, centuries later, unrolls a fragment under sterile museum lights and hears voices that were never meant for them. You shift slightly on the mat, feeling the woven fibers beneath your fingertips, and glance around the room again. The tables blur into one long current of movement, servants refilling clay jugs, fingers drumming idly on plates, conversations overlapping like braided threads. And somewhere in the noise, another secret is passing, right now, soft as breath, destined to travel far beyond this hall. You breathe it in, the food, the laughter, the murmurs, and realize something you hadn't before. The papyrus didn't just record what people said. It recorded how words moved, from person to person, carried like invisible currency through cities lit by oil lamps and stars. Whispered love became gossip. Gossip became stories. Stories became history. And here you are, tracing them backward, one scroll at a time. The music fades for a moment, replaced by the distant croak of frogs by the Nile, and the hush in the room deepens just slightly. Someone leans in, murmuring into another's ear, and though you can't hear the words, you know they'll find their way into ink before morning. That's how it always went. That's why the papyrus remembers. You leave the dining hall behind, carrying the soft hum of whispers with you, and step into a smaller chamber lit by a single, lonely lamp. The air here feels different, lighter somehow, as though the walls themselves are holding back laughter. For the first time tonight, you sense something unexpected woven into these papyrus scrolls: humor. Quiet, hidden, clever humor. It turns out the ancients weren't always solemn scribes recording temple hymns and royal decrees. Sometimes they were funny. Really funny. And the more you look, the more you realize pillow talk wasn't always about longing and secrets. Sometimes, it was pure playfulness scribbled between the lines. You pick up a small fragment lying half-curled on the table. The ink here is bolder, fresher somehow, like the writer pressed harder than usual, maybe trying not to laugh while they wrote. The first line makes you smile. "If your husband reads this, tell him it's about goats." You have to pause for a second, letting it sink in. Goats. 3,000 years ago, someone left what was basically the ancient equivalent of delete our texts. And instantly, you can picture it, a stolen letter slipped under a pillow, a nervous glance exchanged over morning bread, the writer chuckling quietly at their own cleverness while the ink dried. Some scrolls take it even further. In one fragment recovered from a villa near Alexandria, a single sentence is written upside down along the margin. I still remember the figs. That's it. No context, no explanation, just figs. Historians have argued endlessly about what it means. A private joke? A coded phrase? The world's oldest inside reference? One scholar suggested it might have been an erotic metaphor. Another countered that maybe the figs were just really good. Either way, you can feel the mischievous wink hiding between the lines. Then there's the scroll of saffron, unearthed near Luxor. Most of it is a straightforward household account, jars of oil, sacks of barley, bolts of linen. But halfway down, in a completely different handwriting, someone scrawled, "Ask her about the saffron, but not in front of her mother." That's it. And you can almost hear the suppressed laughter of the scribe adding that note. Were they gossiping? Teasing? Warning someone about an embarrassing accident? We'll never know, and honestly, that makes it better. What's fascinating is how these playful fragments hide in plain sight. On the surface, they look like dry inventories, legal documents, or prayer lists. But when you tilt the papyrus just right under the lamplight, you catch tiny deviations, a curve of ink sharper than necessary, a random doodle of a fish, or, and this one makes you grin, a tiny sketch of what looks like a very unimpressed cat. Someone, somewhere, 3,000 years ago, got bored enough to draw sarcastic cats on sacred papyrus. And honestly? Relatable. One particularly strange discovery comes from a scroll now nicknamed the Pillow Joke. It's only 2 lines long, written in careful, elegant script. The pillow knows more than the priest. But the pillow will not confess. You actually laugh out loud in the quiet room, earning a startled glance from a nearby scholar hunched over another fragment. Imagine whispering something scandalous into a pillow, trusting it completely, knowing it would never betray you. And yet, here we are, reading those confessions anyway. Sorry, pillow. And then there are the coded puns, clever little games that even modern translators sometimes miss. One fragment plays with hieratic script in a way that turns the phrase, "Open the door," into something closer to, "Open your heart," like a secret double meaning hidden beneath the surface, invisible unless you already knew the joke. Another scroll replaces a woman's name with a word that sounds almost identical to lotus blossom, a playful nickname disguised as everyday language. It's flirty, sly, intimate, the kind of joke that only makes sense if you were part of it. But humor can be sharp, too. In one papyrus letter, a wife writes to her absent husband, "Do you miss me as much as you miss your sandals?" Ouch. 3,000 years later, you can still feel the sting. And yet, even through the sarcasm, there's tenderness there. You can almost hear her smiling as she writes it, teasing more than accusing. Not all the jokes are personal, though. Some are communal, passed around like whispered memes long before memes existed. On one recovered fragment from Memphis, there's a short exchange written in tiny, cramped script. "He said he'd bring gold. He brought onions." That's the entire conversation. And yet, somehow, you know exactly what it means. Expectations versus reality, 1200 BC edition. The longer you spend with these fragments, the more alive they feel. For so long, history painted these people as distant, solemn, unreachable. But here, beneath lamplight, you can see them laughing at the same things you laugh at. Teasing their lovers. Rolling their eyes at bad gifts. Scribbling inside jokes where no one else would think to look. It makes you realize something quietly profound. These weren't just names on stone tablets. They were people, messy, funny, clever, human. You lean back against the cool wall, smiling faintly to yourself. Outside, a breeze drifts in through the linen curtains, carrying the faint scent of lotus and river water, and you think about the scribes who must have stifled their laughter in the middle of the night, bent over these very words. Maybe they thought their little jokes would fade with time. But they didn't. They waited patiently, hidden between love letters and shopping lists, until someone, you, came along to laugh with them. Somewhere nearby, a papyrus creaks softly as the fibers shift under your hand, almost like it's sharing the joke too. And you realize that even whispers can outlive walls, pillows, and lifetimes, especially the ones written with a smile. The laughter still lingers softly in your chest as you leave the chamber behind, following a narrow path lined with worn sandstone walls. The air grows thicker, warmer, carrying the scent of damp earth and crushed reeds. You're heading toward the source of it all, the place where the whispers began before they were ever inked down. The papyrus workshops. The moment you step inside, the sound hits you first, a rhythmic wet tearing, the rasp of stone blades scraping stalks, the soft slap of fibers pressed flat on smooth wooden boards. It's like standing in the middle of a heartbeat you didn't know the ancient world still carried. Light filters in through lattice windows, sharp and golden, catching on floating specks of papyrus dust. For a second, it feels as though the air itself remembers what it's been part of. You look around and realize how alive this room is. Along one wall, bundles of freshly cut papyrus reeds stand upright in wide clay jars, their pale green stalks dripping faintly into collected water below. Young apprentices kneel nearby, stripping away the outer layers with bronze knives, revealing the soft, pale cores inside. The sweet, grassy scent rises instantly, filling the workshop with something strangely soothing, like walking through a summer field. And here's where the transformation begins. The cores are sliced into thin, delicate ribbons, some barely wider than your fingernail, and laid out in overlapping rows, horizontal first, then vertical, weaving together like fragile cloth. A master craftsman leans over the boards, his hands stained faintly with plant sap, pressing each strip gently into place. There's no glue, no magic binding agent. The natural sugars of the reed fibers, once pressed, seal together on their own as they dry. It's an elegant alchemy, centuries perfected. You crouch beside one board, watching sunlight pool over the still damp sheet. The surface is uneven, soft to the touch, and yet you know this fragile weave will outlast empires. Pillows will decay. Beds will collapse into dust. But this thin, hand-woven sheet of papyrus will carry voices for thousands of years. Nearby, a boy no older than 12 stirs a shallow clay basin filled with river water, dipping the fresh sheets one by one before setting them beneath heavy, flat stones to dry. He hums softly to himself, an ancient melody passed down from the workers who came before him. Maybe he doesn't even know what the sheets will one day hold. Declarations of love, coded warnings, jokes about goats and figs. He's just here for the rhythm, the repetition, the quiet ritual of building something bigger than himself. And yet, even here, in the workshops, there are secrets. You notice one craftsman pause to carve a small mark along the edge of a drying sheet, just a tiny diagonal slash barely visible to the naked eye. When you ask why, he smiles faintly without answering. Later, you'll learn that papyrus makers sometimes left personal signatures hidden in the fibers. Unspoken ownership. Tiny whispers folded into the very skin of the scrolls before ink ever touched them. Some marks weren't so subtle. Archaeologists once found a fragment from a workshop near Heliopolis with a faint sketch pressed into its damp surface. A lotus flower, drawn lightly by fingertip before the fibers set. It wasn't meant for anyone to see, it was just a moment, maybe even a daydream, captured in texture rather than words. And now, thousands of years later, you're tracing it with your fingertips, feeling someone's idle thought echo beneath your skin. You wander deeper into the workshop, passing wooden racks stacked with finished sheets drying slowly under woven mats. Each one looks identical at first, pale and smooth, but up close you see tiny differences. A ripple where the fibers curled, a faint discoloration from river minerals, an air bubble trapped like a ghost beneath the surface. Every sheet is unique, every imperfection a fingerprint, a silent reminder that hands made these, hands that have long since returned to dust. You pause beside an older craftsman, his posture straight despite the weight of years, as he brushes the final sheets with smooth river stones, polishing them to a faint sheen. He explains softly that the finest papyrus sheets, the ones destined for temples and royal decrees, were sorted meticulously from the rest. But there were also lower grades, coarser sheets used for household lists, private notes, and yes, the quiet little whispers hidden under pillows. You smile at the thought, even intimacy had a budget. In one corner, you notice a stack of discarded scraps, rough-edged and uneven, set aside like forgotten thoughts. And yet, some of these scraps were rescued centuries later and reused. Grocery lists written on the backs of love poems, prayer chants hiding beneath merchant accounts, lullabies squeezed into the margins of tax receipts. The papyrus carried more than it was ever meant to. It became the ancient world's recycling bin for secrets. And here's the irony. So much of what survives today comes from these unimportant scraps. The expensive, royal scrolls were preserved in guarded chambers, and many were lost to floods, fires, and time. But the simple household papyrus, folded into pillowcases, hidden under beds, or left in jars beneath the sand? Those are the ones that waited for us. It's almost poetic, history revealing itself through the fragments people tried hardest to hide. You sit quietly for a moment, leaning against the smooth plaster wall, and watch the apprentices work. The repetitive motions are hypnotic: slice, soak, press, polish, dry. And you realize something strange. This isn't just a workshop. It's a womb. Every sheet here is waiting, blank and expectant, ready to cradle someone's voice, someone's confession, someone's midnight thought. Before the ink, before the scribes, before the whispers, everything begins here, in this damp, sunlit room filled with the heartbeat of reeds becoming memory. A breeze slips in through the latticed windows, carrying the soft scent of river water and crushed plants. The papyrus fibers flutter slightly, almost like they're breathing. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the lives these sheets will hold, promises made, secrets broken, jokes whispered, names forgotten. And you wonder if, one day, someone will sit where you're sitting now, unrolling your words, listening to your midnight thoughts like echoes in the dark. Because that's what papyrus does best. It doesn't just hold ink, it keeps breath. The workshop fades behind you, leaving the soft scent of damp reeds and crushed fibers clinging faintly to your clothes. Outside, night has deepened, the kind of darkness that feels soft against your skin, broken only by thin streaks of lamplight spilling from narrow windows. The city sleeps now, mostly, but here and there, pockets of life remain awake. Somewhere nearby, A baby cries softly. Further off, a dog barks, lonely and sharp. And then, drifting above it all, you hear it, the slow, deliberate scratch of reed pens on papyrus. You follow the sound through a quiet courtyard, past walls painted with faded lotus patterns, until you reach a small chamber where light seeps from the cracks around its heavy wooden door. Inside, the air is warm and still, smelling faintly of soot, resin, and worn linen. You step softly across the threshold, careful not to disturb the silence, and see them, the night scribes. There are only 5 of them here, sitting cross-legged at low wooden desks. Each has a clay lamp burning beside their scroll, its wick barely flickering but enough to chase away the deepest shadows. Their faces are bent close to their work, brows furrowed, lips moving silently as they whisper the words they copy, as though speaking them aloud might make them stay steady in their hands. The sound in the room is delicate, reed tips scratching softly against the smooth, polished papyrus. Sometimes it's steady, rhythmic, almost like rain tapping on stone. Other times, it stumbles slightly, betraying a yawn hidden behind clenched teeth. One young scribe, barely more than 16, blinks hard to stay awake, his head bobbing with the weight of exhaustion. Still, he dips his reed into the ink and keeps writing. You sit quietly in the corner, letting your breathing slow to match the pace of their hands. And here, under the fragile glow of oil lamps, you begin to notice the things no one ever writes down in history books: the tremble of a wrist after hours of repetition, the dark smudge of ink on someone's cheek, the soft sighs escaping without meaning to. These are the spaces between the lines, the human moments trapped inside the process of recording. Sometimes, though, you catch glimpses of personality shining through. One scribe leans closer to his companion and whispers something you can't hear, and suddenly, there's the tiniest ghost of a smile pass between them. It vanishes quickly, buried under long hours of concentration, but you see it. These weren't faceless recorders. They had jokes, preferences, grudges, friendships. You realize, sitting there, that their lives weren't much different from anyone pulling an all-nighter in a modern office. Minus the coffee, minus the glowing screens, minus the group chat full of memes keeping everyone awake. You lean closer to one scroll near the center of the room. The ink is still wet, reflecting a tiny pinprick of lamplight, and the words are delicate, precise, until suddenly they aren't. A blotch interrupts the flow of the line, spreading like a tiny burst of night across pale fibers. You glance up at the scribe, noticing his face flushed with embarrassment, and he mutters something under his breath, likely a curse, before smoothing the wet spot carefully with a small scrap of linen. Mistakes mattered. Some scribes even paid fines for ruining papyrus sheets, especially the expensive ones. And yet, tucked between these moments of tension, you find something softer. At the edge of another scroll, hidden far from the main text, someone has scribbled a single line in tiny, hurried script. "If this survives, remember me." Your breath catches. There's no name attached, no date, no explanation. Just a quiet plea folded into the margins, hoping against hope that someday, someone, anyone, would read these words and think of the hand that wrote them. You glance around the room again, at all these bent backs and silent mouths, and you wonder how many more unspoken voices are hiding in the folds of papyrus we haven't yet discovered. The lamps sputter occasionally, their light dipping in and out, and for a moment the shadows deepen until the entire room seems to hold its breath. Outside, the city has gone utterly still. You imagine a family asleep just a few streets away, soft breathing under woven linen sheets, pillows flattening beneath quiet dreams. And here, In this pool of lamplight, someone writes another fragment destined to outlive them, never knowing it will one day be read under museum glass, thousands of miles from where it began. And that's the strange thing. Most of the words copied tonight weren't important at the time. Some scrolls hold him fragments. Others list debts or daily grain rations. But woven between them, without intention, are lives. An absent-minded doodle in the corner of a prayer. A fingerprint pressed into drying ink. A half-finished line interrupted by a sudden blot where the lamp went out unexpectedly. These aren't the grand monuments of history. They're the soft, overlooked moments that make everything else real. You close your eyes for a second, letting yourself sink into the rhythm of the room. Scratch, dip, whisper, breathe. It's hypnotic. You imagine the young scribe in the far corner blinking himself awake, stretching sore fingers before returning to his work. You picture the eldest scribe, his beard flecked with ash, pausing briefly to flex his cramped wrists before drawing the next careful stroke. And you realize something that stays with you. These people weren't just recording words, they were keeping time. Every letter was a mark against forgetting. Every finished line was a tiny act of defiance against silence. A faint breeze slips in through the small window, brushing past your cheek, carrying with it the soft smell of night-blooming lotus and river air. One of the lamps gutters and dies, sending up a thin ribbon of smoke, and the shadows creep in closer. Still, no one stops writing. Not yet. Somewhere far away, the Nile murmurs softly to itself, winding endlessly through the dark, as though even the river is keeping secrets tonight. The chamber of the night scribes fades behind you, leaving the faint smell of soot and oil lingering in your hair. Outside, the streets of Memphis are hushed beneath a silvered moon, and for a moment, you stand still, listening to the faraway hush of the Nile. The river moves like time itself, endless, patient, carrying secrets downstream long before anyone thought to write them down. But tonight, you're not following the river. You're following a single whisper. It begins, as many stories do, with something small. A folded scrap of papyrus, tucked beneath a reed pillow, never meant to be read by anyone but one person. Yet somehow, impossibly, it survived. You step into a small courtyard where shadows cling beneath faded murals of lotus blossoms. At its center sits a low stone chest carved with swirling patterns, its lid chipped and worn. A single papyrus fragment rests inside, curled like a sleeping leaf. You lift it carefully, holding your breath so the fibers won't shiver beneath your fingers. The ink has faded to a soft gray, but the words are still here. When you turn to me, I forgot the sound of the river. Just like that, the world tilts a little. You picture it instantly, someone lying on a reed mat, leaning close enough to hear another's quiet breath in the dark. Maybe the river was rushing loud outside the window, but for one small moment, everything else disappeared. You glance up at the papyrus workshop in the distance, and imagine that sheet freshly made, smooth and pale, before a reed pen traced this memory into it, fixing it into something permanent without meaning to. That's what's strange about whispers. They're supposed to vanish. And yet here you are, thousands of years later, holding one in your hands. You sit down beneath the courtyard's lone palm tree, letting the warm stone press against your back, and turn the fragment over in the lamplight. There's a faint stain along the edge, a small ripple where the fibers warp slightly. A researcher once suggested it might be a drop of wine, another insists it's water from the Nile, a third wonders if it's simply sweat from nervous hands. No one agrees. Historians debate endlessly over things like this, the smallest details, magnified into entire theories. And yet, As you look at the tiny stain, you can't help thinking, maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe someone held this letter so tightly that their own heartbeat left its mark. The fragment itself isn't extraordinary, not really. It isn't part of a grand decree or an epic poem. It doesn't name kings or gods. It's just one person speaking to another in the quiet of night. But that's exactly what makes it extraordinary. Somehow, against every chance, this fragile voice outlasted dynasties. Nearby, a low murmur drifts from an open window. Two women talking softly, their words too faint to catch but their laughter carried easily by the warm night air. You think about how many whispers were never written down, how many were carried off into silence, lost forever. And somehow, that makes the ones preserved on papyrus feel even more precious. But not every preserved whisper is tender. In another fragment, found deep beneath layers of sand near Thebes, a short, angry line survives. You promised me silence. Instead, you gave me shame. It's sharp, unpolished, almost carved into the papyrus rather than written. The strokes are uneven, heavy, pressing so hard that the fibers themselves cracked under the reed pen. And yet you can still see the shape of the emotion inside it, betrayal caught mid-breath, trapped on a page. You stare at it for a long moment, feeling its weight even now. Then there are fragments that turn everything upside down. One papyrus scroll, recovered from the ruins of a small villa near Luxor, is a perfectly ordinary household list: dates, figs, jugs of oil, and between two mundane entries, a single hidden line in tiny script. The door is unlatched. Midnight. You can't help but smile. Imagine unrolling this grocery list centuries ago, looking for a recipe or trade record, and stumbling into an invitation for something secret. Was it love? Was it conspiracy? Was it both? Historians still argue about it, and they probably always will. That's the magic of these fragments. They leave just enough space for you to imagine the missing pieces. You lean your head back against the stone wall, staring up at the stars pricked across the velvet sky. For a moment, you try to picture the person who wrote that first line about the river. Did they laugh softly as they wrote it? Did they hesitate, dipping the reed pen twice before the ink settled on the fibers? Did they think about what would happen if someone else ever read it? Probably not. They were writing for one person, one moment, one heartbeat. And yet, across millennia, their words have become part of a much bigger story. A single, private memory transformed into collective history, not because anyone intended it, but because the papyrus refused to forget. It makes you wonder how many secrets around you right now are waiting, quietly, to be found. Under pillows. Inside jars. Behind collapsed walls where sand has buried entire rooms in silence. Each one carrying someone's unspoken thoughts, paused in time like footprints across a riverbank before the tide returns. You close your eyes and listen. The soft hush of the Nile drifts in faintly from beyond the city walls. Insects buzz lazily in the dark. Somewhere far away, a boatman calls out to another across the water, his voice carrying until it dissolves into the night. And here, beneath a single palm tree, you hold a voice from 3,000 years ago, written for ears that will never hear it again, except yours. The lamplight gutters once, throwing shadows like brushstrokes across the courtyard walls. And you realize something as the silence deepens around you. Sometimes, history isn't made of monuments and wars. Sometimes it's made of whispers someone thought would disappear but didn't. The courtyard grows quiet as you set the papyrus fragment back into its stone chest, tying the lid shut as if sealing away the heartbeat you just heard. The night feels heavier now, filled with the weight of everything unsaid, everything half remembered. Somewhere beyond the walls, the Nile whispers softly in its eternal language, but here another kind of murmur rises, not from the past, but from the present. Because the story doesn't end with unrolling these scrolls. It begins again, every time historians lean over fragments under sterile museum lights, debating, arguing, sometimes shouting, sometimes laughing, trying to decide what the whispers really mean. You find yourself standing inside a quiet research room now, where ancient scrolls rest beneath glass domes. Scholars move like shadows around you, voices lowered but urgent, hands gloved in soft linen as they hover above fragile papyrus sheets spread out like maps of lost worlds. And as you listen, you realize something fascinating. No one agrees on anything. One fragment sits under bright, angled light, its edges curling like dry leaves. A scholar leans close, tapping a faint line with the tip of a stylus. "This," she says softly, "is clearly a love poem." Across the table, another scholar shakes his head, sliding a magnifying glass across the fibers. "No," he argues, "it's not romantic at all. It's code. A hidden message between two scribes during a grain dispute." The debate spirals instantly, voices weaving over one another, and you catch yourself smiling faintly. Thousands of years later, the whispers still cause arguments. Some disputes last decades. There's a fragment nicknamed the Reed Bed Letter, containing only one haunting line. "Meet me where the water turns dark." Poem? Love affair? Political intrigue? A warning? No one knows. Entire conferences have been held about those 8 words. You imagine the person who wrote them, sitting under a lamplight, dipping their reed pen into fresh ink, never once imagining they were writing the most mysterious invitation in history. Then there's the matter of tone. Modern translators wrestle endlessly with this. Ancient Egyptian language carries subtle shifts, playful double meanings, metaphors built into single syllables. In one scroll, a word commonly translated as desire could also mean longing, hunger, or even possession. Does it change the story if the writer was hungry for love or for power? Suddenly, every breath in the letter feels different, and the meaning tilts beneath your feet. One historian sighs, adjusting his spectacles, and mutters something that makes you laugh quietly. Translation isn't science. It's archaeology with feelings. And maybe he's right. Sometimes, though, the disagreements go deeper, beyond poetry, beyond interpretation, into ethics. There's a fragment known as the Hidden Pillow Letter, found beneath the ruins of a collapsed villa in Thebes. Its opening line reads, "I should not write this, but I cannot sleep." The letter goes on for several sentences, deeply personal, clearly never intended for anyone but one person. Scholars fought bitterly over whether it should even be published. One camp argued that history belongs to everyone, these voices deserve to be heard. Another claimed these fragments were too private, too intimate, and that reading them now was an act of trespass across centuries. No consensus. No resolution. Just another whisper suspended in glass, waiting for you to lean in close, knowing full well the writer never wanted you here. Then there are the mistakes. Tiny, accidental mysteries left by the hands that made them. In one scroll from Saqqara, a scribe repeatedly misspells a word, then angrily scratches it out, leaving deep grooves in the fibers. Some researchers believe this was just exhaustion after hours of copying. Others argue it was deliberate, an attempt to hide a forbidden name. Even technology hasn't solved these puzzles. High-resolution imaging, infrared scans, chemical analysis, they reveal layers beneath layers, erased words reappearing like ghosts. Yet every new discovery seems to create more questions than answers. You stare at one reconstructed fragment projected onto a nearby wall, where lines of once hidden text bloom faintly in red light. The characters look delicate, fragile, yet somehow defiant, as though the papyrus itself resists being fully known. And maybe that's the point. History is supposed to be made of facts, right? Kings ruled, battles were fought, temples rose and fell. But sitting here, surrounded by whispers, you realize something different. The further you lean into the personal, the more the edges blur. Was this sentence meant for a lover or a conspirator? Was this secret hidden out of shame or safety? Was this pillow talk just playful nonsense, or the quiet heart of a revolution? Some scholars embrace the uncertainty, even celebrate it. One older woman in the corner, her hair streaked silver, leans back from a magnifying lamp and says softly, almost to herself, "Maybe we're not supposed to know. Maybe it's enough just to listen." You let that thought settle in your chest. Outside, the night wind stirs faintly against the high windows, carrying with it the smell of stone and sand. In the silence that follows, you can almost hear the scrolls breathing around you, as though waiting for someone, you, to decide what they mean. But the truth? Maybe they don't mean one thing. Maybe each whisper survives precisely because it refuses to be pinned down. These fragments lived secret lives beneath pillows, inside walls, under layers of sand. And now, even unrolled under perfect light, they still keep part of themselves hidden. You stand there, staring at a glass case holding one small scrap no bigger than your palm. It looks so unassuming, so plain. And yet, inside its fibers, 3,000 years of longing, humor, fear, and desire hum quietly, waiting. You wonder if the person who wrote it would laugh or cry knowing their midnight thoughts now belong to the world. Somewhere outside, a breeze rattles the shutter softly, as though reminding you, not every question needs an answer. Sometimes, the mystery is the point. The research chamber fades behind you, leaving the muffled debates of scholars in its quiet glow. Outside, the corridors stretch long and cool, lined with shelves where hundreds of papyrus fragments rest in silence. You walk slowly, fingertips grazing the carved stone walls, and for the first time tonight, you realize something strange. The deeper you go, the louder the absence becomes. Because for every whisper the papyrus preserved, there are 1,000 it didn't. You stop in front of a narrow glass case holding a single, curled fragment. At first glance, it looks ordinary. Faded ink, frayed edges, a sliver of thought caught mid-sentence. But then you notice the gaps. Whole sections of fibers are missing, torn or eaten away by centuries of heat and insects. What survives is tantalizing but incomplete. And so, when the door opened, that's it. No ending. No explanation. Just silence where a confession once lived. You lean closer, imagining the missing words. Did someone step into the room unexpectedly? Was it a lover, a rival, a servant carrying food? Or was it something darker, an encounter too dangerous to record even then? Historians have proposed dozens of theories, mapping out possibilities like detectives reconstructing a cold case. And yet, none of them know for sure. That's the thing about these fragments. They're as much about what's missing as what survives. Some absences are natural. Papyrus crumbling, ink fading, time erasing edges like waves against sand. But others? Others feel deliberate. You find one scroll with entire passages scratched out so violently that the fibers beneath tore open, leaving ragged scars. Scholars argue endlessly over it. Was someone hiding a forbidden name? Erasing a political betrayal? Protecting a lover's secret? A few fragments tell on themselves. In one scroll from near Thebes, a faint note is scrawled at the very edge, almost too small to see. I burned the rest. You stare at those 3 words for a long time. Someone chose silence. Someone decided that part of the story would never be known, and yet, somehow, this single sliver escaped the fire, surviving like a heartbeat left behind. It makes you wonder, what's more powerful, the words we have, or the ones we'll never see? You move deeper into the archives, where the air grows cooler and the light dimmer, until you reach a small room where erased texts live. Here, fragments are studied under infrared lamps, revealing ghostly words hidden beneath later writing. On one tablet, the surface seems blank to the naked eye, but under red light, faint lines bloom like veins in stone. A different hand? A different time. Someone used this papyrus twice, layering a new story over an older one, like building a house on buried ruins. The older text? Almost completely illegible. But one line emerges, fragile and trembling, as though resisting translation. Do not trust the one beside you. You shiver slightly, and you're not alone. Researchers argue constantly about what it means. Was it political? Personal? Was it written as a warning, or a threat? No one agrees, and maybe that's the point. Some whispers survive only half-formed, teasing you with questions you'll never answer. And then there are the missing scrolls entirely, the ones we know existed but have never been found. Ancient records mention titles like Songs of the Night Read and Letters Beneath the Moon, collections believed to contain intimate pillow talk poems, coded messages. But they're gone now, scattered to sand and rot, leaving only the shadows of their names behind. It's like standing in front of a locked door with no key, hearing laughter faintly on the other side. Sometimes, though, the silences aren't losses at all, they're choices. On one fragment, a writer pauses mid-thought, leaves a space, and continues on without explanation. Scholars call this intentional omission, a kind of ancient censorship. Maybe they feared someone would find the scroll. Maybe the words were too dangerous, too painful, or too sacred to commit to ink. Either way, that blank space says more than any sentence could. You find yourself holding one such fragment now, its gaps large and deliberate. Your thumb hovers just above the empty fibers, and you realize something quietly profound. Absence isn't nothing. It's full of possibility. Every missing word, every erased line, every deliberate silence invites you closer, pulling you into a story you can never fully know, and somehow, that makes it more intimate, not less. You sit cross-legged on the cool stone floor, breathing in the faint scent of old resin and papyrus, and let the quiet settle around you. Somewhere nearby, a fragment rustles softly in its protective case, as though reminding you it still has more to say, if only you could listen harder. Because here's the thing, history likes to pretend it knows everything. But the papyrus whispers back with a sly smile, not yet. You rise slowly from the cold stone floor, leaving behind the fragments with their torn edges and silent gaps, and step back into the open night. The air feels different now, softer, warmer, humming faintly with the echoes of lives that passed long before yours. Above you, the stars scatter like tiny oil lamps over an endless black sea, and for a moment, you just stand there, breathing in the quiet. Because here's the thing, the scrolls might be fragile, the ink might fade, but the feelings? They never left. You walk along a narrow alley lined with shuttered windows, the scent of lotus drifting faintly from somewhere nearby. In the distance, a lute plays a soft, slow melody, and the sound settles into your chest like an old memory. As you turn a corner, the world seems to fold in on itself. The whispers on papyrus, the murmurs beneath pillows, the half-hidden jokes scribbled in margins, they all start to feel strangely familiar. You pause beneath an open window where a warm light spills into the street. Inside, a couple laughs softly, their voices low but unmistakable, and you feel it immediately, the same pull, the same tenderness, the same hush. It's the same kind of voice you've been reading all night, except this one lives now, in your present. You realize something quietly profound. The scrolls aren't about the past at all. They're about us. Take the fragments of love letters, for instance. Some written in lamplight, tucked beneath pillows, folded carefully into secret jars. They sound so ancient when we speak about them, until you read the words aloud. If the stars fall, I will still find you. That line could live in a modern text message. A note slipped under someone's door. A late-night DM sent at 2:17 a.m. when sleep feels impossible. The medium changes, papyrus, parchment, email, phone screens, but the longing inside doesn't. You exhale softly, and for a moment, the distance between you and them collapses into nothing. Jealousy lived there, too, just as it does now. One tiny scrap, frayed at both ends, carries a single bitter line. She thinks you whisper only to her. Ouch. 3,000 years later, the sting hasn't softened. It's the same text someone might send today, except instead of being hidden under a pillow, it hides in a notification banner, glowing faintly against a modern nightstand. And humor. Oh, humor survives best of all. Remember the papyrus fragment joking. If your husband reads this, tell him it's about goats. That one still makes you laugh softly under your breath. Because haven't we all done this? Crafted half-truths, secret codes, inside jokes shared between only two people? Maybe we don't write them in black ink anymore, but we send them as emojis, as nicknames, as accidental typos with meanings only one person will catch. You keep walking, past shuttered doors and winding alleys, and the deeper into the city you go, the more alive these echoes become. The voices from the papyrus start blending with the voices of now, street vendors arguing faintly somewhere beyond the square, a child crying, the soft shuffle of sandals on stone. For a fleeting moment, the boundary between centuries blurs, and you can almost see them here, a young wife kneeling by a reed pillow, slipping a note beneath its folds, a scribe pausing his reed pen midline, hiding a private thought inside the margin, a lover leaning close under the date palms, whispering where no one else can hear. It's all still happening. It never stopped. You sit on a low stone ledge overlooking the river. The Nile glimmers faintly in the moonlight, endless and patient, the same river they once stood beside to whisper confessions and promises they thought would dissolve into night. Some of those promises survived, others didn't. And somehow, that makes the fragments we do have feel even more precious. Tiny threads connecting your heartbeat to theirs. A soft breeze brushes your face, carrying the sense of warm clay and damp reeds, and you close your eyes for a moment. You picture someone thousands of years ago doing the same thing, sitting here at the river bank, thinking of someone else, scribbling a line in ink before slipping it under a pillow. They thought they were writing for one person. They never imagined you'd be listening. And yet here you are. Because that's the secret the papyrus keeps revealing, again and again. Humans haven't changed as much as we like to think. Technology changes. Languages shift. But longing, fear, love, jealousy, tenderness, those things are immortal. The scrolls prove it. The whispers confirm it. Every fragment you've held tonight reminds you that the past isn't behind you at all. It's folded inside you, alive, waiting to be heard. You open your eyes slowly, watching the moonlight tremble across the water. Somewhere in the distance, a boatman hums softly, the sound threading into the warm silence. And as you sit there, listening, you realize something else. One day, our own whispers, your whispers, might belong to someone else, unrolled under unfamiliar light. What will they hear when they listen? A confession? A joke? A promise? The stars above seem impossibly close tonight, like they're leaning in to listen too. And beneath their quiet glow, you understand, history isn't kept in temples or monuments. It lives in the smallest places. Beneath pillows. Inside folded letters. Along the margins of someone's life. It lives in whispers. Always has. Always will. The night has grown impossibly still. Even the faint hum of the city has faded, leaving only the soft breath of the Nile winding through the darkness. You sit on the low stone ledge by the river, knees pulled close, and for a long moment, you simply listen. The papyrus fragments, the whispered confessions, the jokes and secrets, all of it feels like it's drifting around you now, dissolving into the quiet air, like candle smoke after the flame goes out. You close your eyes and let your breathing slow, matching it to the river's rhythm. Inhale, exhale. Water rushes, laps, whispers. Somewhere far off, a night bird calls once, and then silence folds over the city again. You imagine, just for a second, that the voices you've followed tonight are resting now too, the lovers who scribbled notes beneath their pillows, the scribes who pressed wet ink into smooth fibers, the servants who whispered gossip into the night. Their words are still here, preserved beneath glass, but their voices belong to memory now. The papyrus keeps them safe, but not loud. That's the beauty of it, it never shouts. It waits. You open your eyes and look down at your hands, imagining the fibers of a fresh papyrus sheet resting there, pale and blank beneath the moonlight. You trace your thumb across its invisible surface, feeling the faint weave in your imagination, and you realize something soft but certain. The scrolls were never just about preserving information. They were about holding breath. About taking a fleeting moment, a heartbeat, a sigh, a half-asleep murmur, and pressing it into something that would last. You think back to the first fragment you touched tonight, the one that read, "When you turned to me, I forgot the sound of the river." That line, written by someone whose name you'll never know, is now part of your story. It sits inside you, as if borrowed from a stranger across 3,000 years. And maybe that's what these whispers were always meant to do, to remind us that we've been dreaming the same dreams, fearing the same silences, aching in the same small ways since the beginning of everything. Your gaze drifts up toward the stars scattered like fragments of shattered papyrus across the deep night sky. You wonder how many other voices are still hidden, tucked beneath sand or sealed in forgotten jars, waiting patiently for someone, someday, to unroll their secrets. Maybe they'll find more love poems. Maybe more warnings. Maybe more tiny, quiet jokes meant to make one person laugh and no one else. Or maybe some voices have chosen silence forever. And that's okay, too. The breeze stirs gently, carrying the faintest hint of lotus blossoms from somewhere downriver. The smell is soft, fleeting, like the last line of a letter folded and slipped beneath a pillow. You draw your shoulders closer and lie back against the cool stone, watching the stars ripple faintly above you. Somewhere far away, a small wave breaks against the shore, and in its hush you imagine you can still hear them, the murmurs of scribes, the rustle of reed pens, the sighs of lovers settling into sleep. You hear the pages turning softly, over and over, through centuries of hands, until they arrive here, with you tonight. And now, as the words fade, the night begins to slow. Your thoughts drift gently, your breath steadies, and the fragments you've gathered dissolve into the darkness, settling like sand beneath still water. You realize, finally, that you've been holding this story too tightly, and it's time to let it rest. The river whispers once more. The stars hold steady. And somewhere, beneath layers of dust and silence, the papyrus sleeps too, its secrets safe again. Everything grows quiet. Your eyelids grow heavier. The sounds blur, softening like distant lullabies, until they're nothing more than a hum beneath your dreams. Sleep now. The voices will wait. They always have. End of script. Sweet dreams.